everyone, it's Doris Brinker with another video, this one geared towards my anesthesia coders. Some of the resources, full disclosure, however, that you see within this video are not unique to anesthesia. So because you're not in anesthesia, you might still find them helpful. If you're a new coder, it may just help you to know about the resources. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to share resources with you. So I'm going to cover 5 resources. Every coder that reports anesthesia services or audits anesthesia or is charged with educating regarding anesthesia should have in his or her resource toolkit when applicable. So if you find that, wait, that doesn't apply to me, it doesn't hurt to have the information because it may not be applicable today, but you could find it applicable tomorrow. Resource number 1, your anesthesia crosswalk. Okay, so this is what it looks like for 2020. This is available in both paper and electronic forms. So if you are a person who doesn't want to be kind of weighed down with carrying books and schlepping all your books, you can have it electronically on a shared cloud type source that you can access anywhere, or you can have it on a flash drive, whatever works best for you, or just store it on your computer. So number 1 is your Crosswalk guide. You must use this in order to properly use it. You have to use it in addition to your CPT book. So if you're one of those coders who has to actually apply the ASA, some of you are fortunate enough where you have the Crosswalk built into your coding system. So if you have a practice or an organization that does that, you don't ever have to really pick the anesthesia code, except in those cases where there's not a one-to-one correlation between the surgical code you pick and the anesthesia code. This is still helpful in those cases, but you also need the second resource I'm going to talk about for that. If you're a coder, however, that only reports anesthesia services, for example, my coding team that reports anesthesia, we enter the anesthesia code that was done. We don't have to enter the surgical code and the system crosswalks it. This is a must for you. You must have this book. So the crosswalk is set up. You look up your surgical CPT code in your CPT book. Once you figure out what code that is, or range of codes that it is, it's really great in that regard too, because you don't have to have the exact code. You look up the range, you see where the crosswalk manual is taking you, and that could be your code or it could give you an alternative. When it gives you an alternative, resource 2 is going to be very helpful, and that is your relative value guide. We call it the little book. That's why I always mix it up with the crosswalk, because I've been calling it the little book forever. Okay, so the relative value guide is helpful because it includes just the anesthesia codes. It includes the base unit values for each of those anesthesia codes. So if you look the code up in your crosswalk, for example, you get it in your crosswalk, it may say 5, give you an alternate, but it doesn't give you the base unit value for the alternate. This book includes all the anesthesia codes and the base unit values for them. It also has codes that are common in anesthesia. So it has nerve blocks, it has E&M codes, modifiers, etc. These resources are available, again, in paper or electronic form, and I'll put links if I can figure out how to do that. I'm not tech savvy, as I said, which is why I'm on this wired headset. There's probably something better than that out there that I haven't discovered yet. If you're not tech savvy like me, then hopefully you still find the information helpful. If you want the electronic version of these books, this is what it looks like. So pros and cons of both. First, if you are a person that has to travel, the paper books become quite cumbersome. They actually have a little weight to them, but for me, like when I travel, I bring my I have to have all my coding resources because I often find myself working in locations other than my home or my office, right? So they're very heavy. Also, your paper books are not searchable. So 2 disadvantages of the paper books: weight, and 2, they're not searchable, easily searchable, right? The electronic versions look like this. So this is your crosswalk. Again, it has your CPT code, your CPT description, the anesthesia code, the anesthesia description, the base unit value. You can just scroll across to that, and any of those notes that would apply, comments that you usually find in the bottom or under the code in your Crosswalk manual, they're also listed there. The disadvantage, and this again is the crosswalk, and this is just a visual for you so you have the relative value guide. Okay, I cleaned it up, right? So because I use them often, I need my data to be easily accessible. So you may see in some of these that, data is hidden, or it's shrunk, or it's removed, or looks like it's removed because it's hidden. That's because for a navigation standpoint, I needed to work quickly, and that's what's there. The disadvantage of your electronic versions of your relative value guide in your 2020 on your crosswalk is that the information. For example, what I love about the little book that I get every year is it has information outside of the base unit, right? Like qualifying circumstance data, that's in your CPT, so that's not huge. It has a resource for modifiers, for example, and one of the most helpful that helped me, I referred it to my physicians, is they give you sometimes position statements. In 2019, last year in October, they published the ASA physical status classification system. I don't know which way I'm going there. Okay. Classification system. So when you buy the paper books, you get those. When you buy the electronic books, I don't know why they did that, but they seem to have omitted it from it. It's not within the book. The data is also not laid out the same when it is there. So if you find the accessory information helpful in having that every year, you may want to keep buying your books. The third disadvantage another disadvantage of the electronic crosswalk compared to the paper is your paper books are cheaper typically than your electronic. That wouldn't make much sense, right? You think, well, why would it be cheaper if it's electronic and they save money? I'm not really sure of the answer. Well, I have a speculation, but I won't say what my speculation is in that regard. If you have a provider who is a member of the ASA, you can get your paper books a little cheaper by using your provider's membership. One of the reps told me once I had to have it sent to that provider, and we were able to get that overridden or whatever. But she's like, well, it would have to be mailed to the provider. So I'm like, hey, can you, I send this to you and you just send it to me. I ordered a book. And I think we were able to get that resolved. I can't remember. It was years ago. So if you want to keep doing your paper books and you have a provider who's a member of the ASA, you can get it cheaper. If you buy the electronic versions, however, they do not extend the discount to the electronic version. So you'll be paying not only more money, but you'll be unable to get the discount that you would get if you got the paper book. So those are the pros and cons of the paper and electronic versions of your crosswalk and relative value guide. Your third resource that I recommend you have in your anesthesia compliance and coding toolkit is the Cpt Assistant. The Cpt Assistant is a subscription service. Let me go to that one here. Okay. And it looks like this. So it's basically a newsletter that they print every month, and they will mail it to you, or you can get the online Cpt Assistant. Again, I don't want a bunch of papers. Like, I have so many books. I'm already a person, you can see in the background, I don't like to get rid of my books if my husband hates it, but I don't like to get rid of my books. I keep my books because as an auditor, I'm sometimes not dealing with the current year in an audit. It could be old, so I need to have the manuals and everything that was relevant at that time. So you can decide to get the paper version of the Cpt Assistant where they mail you the newsletter on paper. That's fine. Storage-wise, that can kind of build up based on how long you do it. Or you could get the electronic version of the Cpt Assistant. This is the online version of the Cpt Assistant. So if I can search this by going to newsletters, the ones published in 2020, and then it's broken down by month. Or I can say, you know what, I want to go to a particular code like 00670. You find those codes, or 670, it's not there. Here we go, right? If you look in your CPT book, you'll find this little arrow or notation under some of your codes. When it mentions the CPT Assistant, it's talking about the month and the year. So it might say 0712, right? Because July is the 7th month and 12 is the 2012 is the year where that code was addressed. Be aware though, just so you don't know, and this is why I think a lot of anesthesia offices don't like to buy it. When you see it, for example, this is under 00670. Notice that 00670 falls within this range. So it got pulled into this CPT Assistant article, but 00670 was not specifically addressed in the November 2007 edition of the CPT Assistant. So just FYI, so you're aware of that when you're purchasing it, right? Because you might be frustrated to think, oh, I bought it specifically for that and it's not there. I do believe, like I used to buy a specific, the paper, I used to buy a specific publication that I wanted of the CPT Assistant. So if I just wanted the November 2007, I could get the November 2007. This is one of those resources that, again, you may not see. If you don't see a lot of notes in your manual for your CPT book, they may not have a lot of publications. You should also note, though, the timing of this. This publication is done monthly. We get our books yearly. So when you get your book that was printed in November or December or whatever for 2020, it doesn't have January, February. It's not going to have that year's CPT Assistance references there. That's where I find the online to be helpful because it is dynamic. So as they add it, as I see when I go to newsletters here, this is here already. Like the one for July was already published. As soon as it opens, right? The one for July was already published, and they covered a couple articles. I often go to the FAQs. Because that's where it's a mix of everything. Also, they cover the errata. You don't need the CPT Assistant to get the errata. The errata is a corrections document. So the erratum, as they put here, is a corrections document. So if they make a mistake in CPT when they printed it, this is their way of saying, oops, you have the book, make sure you update that. You don't need to be a member of the AMA or by the CPT Assistant newsletter in order to get the erratum. They usually publish them on the open site so you can access it. That's number 3. Number 4 resource that I recommend you have is the Ncci. And if I figured out how to do it right, I'm going to include some links in this video under wherever it shows to show you how to get to these resources. For me as an educator, if you've ever seen me speak or ever been involved in anything I've done from an education standpoint or dialogue standpoint, I really want to empower people to have their own information, because sometimes this stuff is subjective, right? It's based on how you interpret it. But more than that, as a coder, you must be able to defend yourself, right? You have to do defensible coding. And yeah, I might speak nationally, so might quite a few of my friends and have recognition for being experts in the field, but you can't say you're doing anything because we told you to do it, right? Oh, well, Dora said that, Amy said that, Terry said that. Like, so who are they and why would I care? You have to be able to defend what you're doing. So this takes you straight to the resource so you understand what you're doing without speculating or referring to someone else. The next resource I'm going to give you, so if I can put that link in it, I'll put the link. Some of these will be direct, will take you right to where we're going, where you need to go. Others, like the subscription ones, maybe a few steps before you can see it or a purchase required before you can get it. The next one is the Ncci policy manual. Right, so you might have the Ncci edits and manuals. You need both of those. You might have those embedded or buried into a program like Supercoder or Code Correct, or they have a lot of them. Encoder Pro are examples, and they include often the edits there. Some of them do or don't. Or it's a different place to access them, include the actual manual. I find a lot of more coders are familiar with the edits than are familiar with the manuals that accompany those edits. So when you go onto the link that I'll provide you, if I do it right, if you don't see the link, it's because it didn't let me add it or I couldn't figure out how to do it. If you message me or comment, I'll go ahead and paste that somewhere there so you can access it. But you need the complete CCI policy manual. It is a zip file, so it's pretty large. You can save it on a disk or your computer. When you open it, you want to go to the chapter that pertains to the area that you're coding. So for an anesthesia coder, I would, what are you doing? Come on. I would make sure I did this series, chapter 2. Also general, because general is just general. It pertains to everything. 0 for anesthesia. You also, as an anesthesiologist, a coder for anesthesiology, you find yourself reporting central lines and arterial lines. So the 30,000 series, chapter 5, would be helpful for you. You will absolutely use chapter 8 because that's where our nerve blocks, our femoral block or epidural, for example, when it's not the method of anesthesia, where that comes in. So you can download the complete manual. This is one of those general resources that you don't have to be in anesthesia to use it. I use it for every single specialty I code, and that's a few. There's not a chapter in this manual I haven't read. Probably not. No, yeah, actually I did read chapter 10. I was going to say probably not the 80,000 series codes, but I have a client who does drug screening testing. So I kind of stay in the know. If you like to read, you love this kind of data because I stay in some resource or another reading, and this gives you a lot of content to read. The NCCI policy manual is helpful in explaining some of the zeros and ones that you see. So especially if you're an AR person, this is going to be helpful for you, because if you find that I applied a modifier and it still didn't get paid, well, you probably missed that it was a zero edit, meaning under no circumstance or any modifier would they ever pay you for it. Or it paid and it denied again and after documentation and they still didn't pay it. It could be the data, the circumstance under which it is covered. It's covered in that manual, but you didn't reference the manual to know, and you added the modifier inappropriately. This is why I often say it really is a marriage. A polygamous marriage, if you think about it, right? When you think about coding, reimbursement, and compliance, you've got to be able to know what is included and what is proper based on that payer policy in order to do the right thing on the claim in reporting it and supporting the service that the documentation supports. Your fourth resource, that's the fourth. Your fifth resource is really specific based on what your coding scenario is. So if you don't code for a teaching hospital, you'll find no use in the next two that I'm going to show you. They both relate to the same thing. The one is a little more abbreviated, the other one is quite complete, and I think something you should reference anyway as a coder because it covers other areas. That would be the Medicare Claims Processing Manual and the Teaching Rule. I report for a teaching hospital, for example, for physicians that work at a teaching hospital, so they often include fellows or residents in the training, in the care of their patients for training purposes. So I've got to ensure that my documentation is appropriate in order to report the service under the fee-for-service program, as opposed to one that would not be reportable. So Chapter 12 is helpful for that. If you work at a teaching hospital, this particular resource, although this one is unique to teaching and abbreviated, this one is just a great one to have. So if you don't have this, I'll include the link. Include it in your coding arsenal. It is very, very, very helpful for you to code compliantly. So when someone says, show it to me in writing, and that's me, like, I'm fine being wrong. I'm not into the certainty of rightness, but show me how I'm wrong, because if I understand how I messed up, I'm less likely to mess up again. If you just tell me that I messed up again, it's like watching someone cook a recipe. I don't know what you did if I didn't see all the steps. So show me the documentation. Show me what I misinterpreted so I know I did it right. And this really takes you to that. So your teaching rule, which is really important if you find yourself in anesthesia and you're teaching hospital, you need to be mindful of checking multiple areas of the teaching rule, right? For example, time-based codes is where your anesthesia is going to be covered. Some of the things there's also a section specific to anesthesia in it that you'll find. And also surgical procedures. So here we go, yeah. Physicians, billing, and teaching setting. Let's say your provider was involved in the teaching of a fellow who did a central line or an arterial line. Well, that's not a zero code. That's not an anesthesia service. It's not time-based, so it doesn't fall into that particular subchapter. You would need to look at the chapter under surgical procedures and determine what that looks like. Two additional resources. I know I said 5, and that's really the 5 that I was pertaining to, but 2 additional things that you may want to have in your Rolodex or resource, however you look at it, is Medical Society Board. So one of them I've already given you the link for, the ASA, where you can purchase the Crosswalk and the Relative Value Guide, but they're also a really good resource from a specialist position standpoint. They're really a good resource, right? So how do anesthesiologists treat CPAP patients? What do they think how do they define monitored anesthesia care, for example? Those position statements are, although not regulatory, highly persuasive when you're defending and reporting anesthesia scenarios, because it's like, this is how the industry does it. And I have to tell you, having dealt with auditors at insurance companies, they are sometimes out of the circle to kind of understand how things are, out of the loop of how things are done in that particular industry, because they might be auditing everything and not be able to drill down in what's specific to that specialty. So it's really good to have your medical society board resources in your arsenal. For our sake, for anesthesia, that is the American Society for Anesthesiology. And like this video, and probably the people that are in it, resources, right? People who are in the industry, who do it, who have done it for years, or just like people. I find it so wonderful when we do the live events in different locations, like Decision Health, when we do that one, and some of the camps and everything I do and the chapters I speak at. I love it because the networking among coders is great. It's like, hey, are you doing this particular type of procedure? Have you ever heard of this? What's an IPAC, right? What's a peripheral nerve stimulator? These different blocks and types of anesthesia and MAC and nitrous, those are some of the conversations that might come up that help you. I am so fortunate, I think, because, being in the industry, I call on my friends and my professional acquaintances. Hey, Kelly, Dennis, what do you say about this one? Or have you heard of this? Or how are you doing this? Or what resources have you been involved in? Especially for people, at that level where we've audited and we've kind of fought with insurance companies in some cases, or fought our providers to change things because of, results of audits and things like that. So, they can often help you move through, and it doesn't have to always be someone at that level, but it's really helpful when you have someone that understands the industry enough that you can bounce ideas off. So, my Amy, my Kelly, my Terry, there's so many people that I call on when I find, like, have you seen this, or what's your understanding of this, or help me understand this. And they're easier sometimes than dealing with the providers. And sometimes I even use my providers. It's all about building your network. The stronger your network, the better, more compliant coder you'll become, and you'll help secure your provider's reimbursement. That's the goal: compliant coding and securing our provider reimbursement. The truth of the matter is, you cannot stop a provider from being audited. It's an impossibility. You cannot stop an audit. What you can do is report in a manner that if that provider's audited, you don't have anything to worry about, because you can support what you do. And don't be surprised if you find yourself in an audit situation and you're actually educating the auditor that's auditing you with a resource to defend your provider. So I hope you found this video helpful. More to come. I saw someone say something about anesthesia. Remember, some of the resources mentioned here, like the Cpt Assistants and the NCCI edits, as well as the teaching rule, they are not unique to anesthesia, but definitely helpful to anesthesia. So if you're one of those coders who work in another specialty, consider looking up those resources and finding out how they can work for you. In everything, I pray you stay safe. I thank you so much for visiting my channel. Please give me your feedback. Let me know whether you found the video helpful, if there's anything you're stuck on, or how I can support, and I'll be happy to do that. Thank you everyone for attending, and I hope you have a great day. Oh, subscribe to the channel, and next time I load something, you'll have it, you'll be notified without any additional work from me. Sorry, as I advance technology, I'll make this cleaner and more efficient, but that's where we are now, so it's a work in progress. Have a good day, everybody.